And Michael, if you want to take it away.
Terrific. Hey, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Awesome. All right. So I'll share my screen in just a second. I did want to say I'm really sorry for your loss. I know when someone important like that leaves, I know when I lost my beekeeping mentor, it was really hard. So this sounds like it's a real blow to your group, and I'm really sorry about that. That's tough. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen here, and I'm hoping you can see this. It says keeping time on the top.
Yep, we got it. Looks great.
Awesome.
Looks great.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. So this is going to be real informal. If you have questions, I'll try to keep an eye on the little screen here on the side and see if I can catch somebody. But don't hesitate to just kind of shout it out, because I'm not going to get real formal about this. And what I want to do today is share with you kind of some of the stuff I've done over the past couple of years. I was sort of keeping track of what's going on in the hive and on our property, and sort of with other beekeeping clubs here in Maine, and just compare some notes with what little bit I've had a chance to find out about beekeeping, or at least the weather out there in Kansas City compared to Maine. So let me tell you first off just a little bit more about me and who I am. I'm a hobby beekeeper, and I like to say I've got a lot of experience. You may be familiar with the adage that good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from poor judgment. And so I'm a beekeeper with lots of experience. Made a lot of mistakes over the years. I'm not a big operator, just a handful of hives, kind of my wife and I have here in our backyard, and mostly because I have a day job. If I didn't, I'd probably do a lot more. But in retirement, I hope to not ramp up too much more, but do some more. I began beekeeping when I was in school in Michigan in 1987. We moved to Maine in '89 with our family, and for the past 20 years, we've lived on a nice woodlot here. It's actually in a town called Waterville, which is in central Maine. It's sort of in the Kennebec Valley, and that affects our weather somewhat, but we're about, I guess 90 minutes to an hour up I-95 from the border with New Hampshire. We've done a few things. We got lots of gardens, and we do have sort of overseeded our yard in places with white clover, and that's really helped us ensure bee forage throughout the year. I think you're going to find, though, that my seasons of beekeeping look a lot different from yours, and it'd be neat to hear more about your experience. So 3 to 5 colonies, sometimes a few more, and getting about 100 pounds of honey each year that I just generally either sell a little bit to folks at work or give here at give to friends. Biggest challenge is everybody else is the varroa mite. Just can't seem to lick it. And I've been through trying everything from no method to organic methods to pretty aggressive pest control. So that's my biggest challenge. And maybe we'll get a chance again to share some ideas on that.
Real quick, Michael, sorry to interrupt you, but I kind of forgot that we had some polls that we can post. And it might be nice to get a sense for the group. Before you start, I'm going to try to launch a poll, everybody. And if it doesn't work, I'm sorry that we're kind of new to this. But here we go. Should pop up on your phone or your computer. There's 5 quick questions here, and answer them if you want, or if you don't, that's fine too. And first question should be, how many years have you been keeping bees? Second question, how many colonies are you currently keeping? The third question, if you just scroll down, where are your bees generally located? And this is going to give Michael and the rest of us an idea of how what access to forage your bees currently have. I added some other questions here about how much honey did you harvest, just to get an idea of the scale and scope. That question is going to be kind of linked to the how many colonies do you keep, but it's also going to help give us an idea of, for the group, the average honey pull per colony. And then preferred mite treatment is there at the bottom. Of course, if you don't keep bees, or if you're getting your first colony this year, there's a spot there for you to mark that you're just getting started. But I'm going to go ahead. This poll's been posted for a minute. We've got 10 and 11 responses now. I'm probably going to go ahead and close it here in another 10 seconds. So if you haven't answered it yet, you might skip and jump through. Oh, yep, 15 of 26 participants. That's good. And I'm going to end the polling in 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to share the results. So this gives us an idea of the profile. A little bit different this year. We've got some folks who, about a third of our group has been beekeeping for more than 20 years. Half, you'll see there, keep less than 5 colonies. But we do have at least one poster here who keeps between 40 and 99. I think I know who that is. Mostly backyard beekeepers. Also got several on the farm. So this is great. Hopefully this helps you out, Michael, and kind of knowing who you're talking to.
Yeah, that helps a whole lot. That helps a lot. We really need variety too. Oh yeah, I can think of a million questions for you folks. So anyway, all right. So as I was saying, I got kind of interested in discovering that there's this thing called phenology, which is something, I don't know, a big fancy word for things I think I've always done. My wife's involved in a program here called Master Naturalists, and it's kind of like master canners and master beekeepers in the Midwest. You go to training and you get certified and you do a lot of community service. But anyway, phenology is simply just looking at regularly occurring plants and animal life cycle events. And so immediately, probably lots of things pop up in your mind. But the reason you do this is try to understand the impact of seasons on your, say, your apiary or your farm or just sort of anything you're doing. And then understand the influence of behaviors that occur in both the natural and the so-called built environments here. And so phenology was sort of, it piqued my interest a little bit because I started keeping track of the blossoms on our apple trees, and when our apple trees did well and when they didn't, and when I was going to split hives or I was going to get some new nukes, I wanted to time it around our apple trees. And then I realized that people have been keeping track of this stuff for a long time. And so those of you who have a certain age are going to recognize this song a little bit. I think birds do it, bees do it, and dedicated fleas do it. But animals and plants sort of depend regularly on these natural phenomena. You got things that are nocturnal, so there's different activities going on at nighttime and different things going on in the daytime. Fireflies don't fly in the daytime, and owls and bats and fox and a bunch of other animals basically operate at night. That's a kind of a phenology thing. There are hibernations that occur. We're just breaking winter here now, basically today. And so you've got bears coming out of their dens, and you got spring migrations we're looking for. We've already seen our first turkey vulture. That's a big deal for us up here. And it's available pretty much following whatever insects or plant food sources that depend on the weather. That's what we kind of mean by phenology. And so farmers keep really good track of this. It's a big deal out in, Kansas and the Dakotas and Missouri and places like that. Gardeners pay attention to, when they can get the frost out of the ground. Athletes are going to do it, bird watchers, hunters, fishermen. They all have their own seasonal cycles they pay attention to. And if you do multiples of these things, you're going to be exploring and doing things at different times of the year. And so even educated beekeepers do it, and consciously or not. Phenology turns out, in my mind, to be an integral part of any beekeeper that's paying attention to their operations. The big thing we do right now for the next sort of 6 weeks is going to be looking for that dandelion bloom. That's the time where I can finally have some confidence that my hives are going to be okay. It's when we make nukes. That's when we start to worry about swarming activity. When I order new packages or nukes, or if I'm going to move my hives at all, I'm going to do it in time around the blossoms of my fruit trees or blueberries. Up here, they send a bunch of, I can't remember what fraction of total beehives go out to California each year, but that's time for the almond, blooms. And blueberries here are the big crop that a lot of commercial beekeepers will move their hives up from all parts of the country just to be part of that pollination activity. But it turns out, if you pay attention to the seasons on your own property, it'll help you choose a good hive location. And then during the year, you can help to identify when the nectar's flowing or when you get a dearth. When you think about the amount of pollen and water available for your bees, or if you're doing an inspection of your hive, you almost always look at the color of the pollen they're bringing in, because it tells you a little something about what they're feeding off of. Like pretty soon now, we might even get some crocuses coming out of the ground, and we'll see some colored pollen coming in from those. I use it to time the honey harvest, and then when to prepare for the winter. And then once I'm in the winter, I'll be looking for cleansing flights, and hopefully we get a January thaw where we can get some cleansing flights going on. But basically, it's keeping time, and I think it's true that, well, I know it's true. Way back in time, historical records are playing a real important part in our understanding of these nature's life cycles. So what people call phenophases. It's a big word, and I never used it before this presentation, but it just means, seasonal cycles and phenology. There are logbooks that recorded the weather. There are all kinds of journals from back when, and even receipts for things that were purchased back in centuries ago. And people found cave drawings like this one I've got on the right-hand side of a honey harvest. And, the dating of that is centuries ago. There's always been this thing called big data. I don't know, I'm a bit of a data geek, and in my work, I do a lot with data. I kind of take umbrage a bit to these new fads about big data, because we've always dealt with big data sets. There's nothing new about that. And weather and meteorological data are two good examples. There's weather data that's recorded down to the hour, if you're actually the minute, and you can accumulate a lot of data real fast. And that's two things that are helpful, and I'm going to talk about today about when we think about phenology. There are a bunch of ways on the computer you can get weather information. Weather Underground's a good source. Dark Sky is pretty cool, although Apple bought them last year, and so their forecasts I don't think are nearly as accurate. But you can type in your own address, and it'll give you weather for wherever you're living. And their forecasts, like I say, aren't as good as they used to be. But if you want to see what's going on right at your house, it's got some really nice. The radar is pretty good. So if you're thinking of going out on a canoe or kayak trip, or going out to cut the hay, you can see what's going to happen in the next hour for dark sky. So we use it for that kind of thing. You can also get a little bit of historical information from there, but the most reliable source of historical weather data is from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. They have this National Center for Environmental Information. You can download data for most places around the country. It's a little tricky because their data is centered at places like airports and things like that. We have a little airport here in town that has a station on it, but sometimes it goes down and we don't get it quite right. But the bigger communities have really reliable weather data. So you can get something, if not right at your house, pretty close. And that's what I basically do. In a place like Weather, here's your forecast for this next week from Weather Underground. And you see they're recording the amount of rain you get, the wind direction, the precipitation, all of that kind of stuff. This is the forecast for Kansas City this week. And I tell you, we haven't seen temperatures like that in a while, although today's a pretty good day here. Keeping time, lots of ways people mark the seasons. When I was in Michigan and we had a garden, people said, well, we plant the snow peas on Good Friday every year. And if you know anything about the religious seasons, Good Friday changes all the time. And so that was always kind of and there are these moon gardeners, people that like to plant to lunar cycles, who think that the moon has some sort of, and its relationship to the earth affects the types of plants you can plant that time. I grew up in Kansas, and I remember as a kid, my dad telling me that, well, we plant the corn when the leaves on the trees are the size of a squirrel's ear. And I don't know if people still say that out there, but that stuck with me. And around here, we keep track of the first frost and freeze dates. But it's really the ice out on the local lakes that's the big deal here. There are all kinds of betting pools on when ice is going to be out and celebrations for ice out here. Mud season turns out to be a legitimate season here, and I think it does probably in most places around the country. But again, that's a regularly occurring part of life in nature. And those are all known as phenophases. But nature's fickle. You can have some pretty crazy stuff happen, and it seems like more so lately. It's not predictable. It keeps to its own schedule. So you can try as you want to keep track over time, but you're always going to get surprises. And so that's sort of like beekeeping, though. So I think that's why I don't mind it too much. Another way to think about this is in terms of growing zones. You folks here around Kansas City area are in like probably 6 A, I guess it would be. And I'm here in Maine in Kennebec County, where I'm in 5A. And that turns out to be about a month to 6 weeks apart from each other in terms of growing seasons, as near as I can tell. These are on the same color-coded scale. So 6B would be the same color green on both charts. We just don't have any 6Bs in Maine. And you don't have any zone, sort of 2 or 3 we've got up north. But one way you can keep track is this thing called growing degree days. And I was familiar with heating and cooling degree days because some of the work I do has to do with modeling electricity demand and some of that forecasting of that. And so I used to use those as measures of the weather. So I was surprised though to find something that farmers and gardeners and others use called growing degree days. And it's a measure of the growing season. They measure the heat accumulation that you need in order to have plant growth and development. And it's a measure that you can use to compare across crops and across time. And I think it can be a useful predictor of when a plant's going to bloom or go to seed, or the timing of when a crop is ready to harvest. Some of you may be already really familiar with this, but farmers use it a lot for wheat and grain. Cooperative extension agents recommend it and have all kinds of nice tools and calculators in just about every state. I've even seen some sites where golf course owners use it to try to see when they're going to get the frost out of the golf greens. And so my question was, well, could I compare total growing degree day units from year to year to help me predict when plants are likely to bloom and when it might be a good time to split a colony or when to anticipate a honey flow or even a dearth? And basically it just requires that I keep track of temperature and do these calculations. And that's what phenology is all about. And really phenology is just about observing the world around you. And like I say, beekeepers do that as much as anybody else, if not more. It works kind of like this. Most flowering plants don't grow when the temperature is really cool. Now, grains like corn and wheat will kind of begin to germinate once the frost is out of the ground. But most of the things that we care about as beekeepers, they don't grow very well in cool temperatures. And growing degree day units are equal to the number of degrees that the average daily temperature gets above a certain threshold. In other words, when there's enough heat on that day for a plant to actually grow. But growing degree days aren't actual days. It's the number of degrees by which the average daily temperature gets above that threshold, whatever it's going to be. Now I use 50 degrees. That's a pretty commonly used one for gardeners and people that are thinking about plants that blossom and trees too. You'll see on the right-hand side here though that there's a lot of different uses of this, not just for plants, but also for insects that emerge at certain diseases and so degrees. And you've got certain pests that many agricultural agents kind of keep track of. Grain farmers often use 40 degrees as a growing degree day threshold. And what you do is you add up and monitor the number of accumulated degree days over the season, over the growing cycle. And that gives you a benchmark for evaluating the phenology plants in the life cycle of animals, wherever you live. So for example, the easiest calculation, and the one that most people do, is just take the average temperature. So we're going to take the maximum for the day and the minimum for the day and add them together, divide by 2, and then you subtract 50 from that. And if the average temperature is less than 50 degrees, well, there are no growing degree day units that day. And so you can see we're talking about the average temperature above 50 degrees here. And then you add up each day throughout the year to get a total number for the year to date. Now in our apiary, the first growing degree day generally occurs around the last week of April. Although I was looking at the forecast for this week, we might actually get one this week. But for you folks, it's not unusual for you to start getting growing degree days in January. Although it seems like late February and early March is more of a common norm for you folks. Now, There's some advantages to growing degree days. They're pretty easy to calculate if you've got access to temperature data, and they're easy to understand and explain. You can see on the picture here on the right, the temperature when it's above 50 degrees, usually in the morning, rises throughout the day, and then it gets cooler at night. And so basically the average is going to be the area under this triangle, if you want, and it reflects the amount of time there was actually enough heat, energy on the site for a plant to grow. And you can get this data, like I said, from a lot of sources historically and in real time, and you can compare it across regions and even different growing cycles. There's some disadvantages though. I don't know who it was that said all politics is local, but definitely all weather's local. And it can be pretty inaccurate if you're drawing from some of these sources. And it assumes that plants grow linearly, and that's not true. This curve, for example, this red curve here in the lower right-hand corner, well, that's how corn grows. You know, when the temperature is cold, it doesn't grow very fast, and all of a sudden it takes off. And if you're doing this sort of growing degree day formula here, you're going to overestimate and underestimate the growth cycle. So it doesn't work for all crops real well. And it doesn't capture some stress events. So you may have a hot, dry day that's not going to help with the growth of your plants or any blossoms. And you know that these depend on nectar, and if it hasn't been rainfall for a while, then it doesn't matter what your growing degree day units say. And there are other factors that might affect, you know, photosynthesis and the ability of the plant to produce nectar. And so technically, the minimum temperature at which plant growth occurs is going to differ by species. You know, corn and oats and barley are different than tomatoes, for example, or peppers. And the soil quality is going to play a role. And if you're living in an urban area, you're going to have a very different kind of potential phenophase, if you want, or growth experience than you are if you're living on a farm. And there are lots of other environmental and geospatial factors. You know, there are places in my backyard next to my barn, for example, where the sun hits it. I could grow, and that's where the first dandelions appear. But that's a lot different than the other side of my yard, which still has snow on it. So there are microclimates that can result in, and plants have different growth curves, like I showed you with the corn curve, for example. And so people come up with other ideas about how to do that. And one is, you know, those that are really into the math can fit a sine curve to it. In other words, you take that triangle and you can apply a different kind of curve to it. And the thinking is that, well, there's nonlinearities, and sometimes, you know, the temperature doesn't rise and fall perfectly over the course of the day. And someone's come up with a method called the Baskerville-Emmon method. This is pretty popular. Michigan's extension agent likes this one, where you fit a smooth trigonometric curve to the observation. So you're keeping track of the weather during the day, and you fit a smooth curve to it, and you get a little bit better representation of it. I tried this method. It's kind of crazy complicated, but it wasn't better to me than the other one. What I've done is gone over to a home weather station, and you can get these without too much expense, and you can keep track of stuff just as high frequency as you want to do it. And this, for me, is more accurate. You know, the closest weather data that I get reliably is anywhere from, you know, 40 to 70 miles away. There are a couple other airports that have pretty good data. And the difference between, you know, the airport down in Portland and here is almost a full growing zone. And so that doesn't work so well for me. So what I've done here is show you the data I had last year in May for temperatures here in central Maine on our property. Now the blue line are temperature readings every 5 minutes. And what I can do is average up those temperature readings every 5 minutes to get my average temperature. And then I'll use the same old growing degree day formula. The orange line are the recorded highs and lows for each day. And so if I was going to use the average degree day formula, right, I'd have something here where I'd take the maximum temperature and the minimum temperature and divide by 2. And then I'd subtract 50 from that. So I get an average temperature on May 1st of 48 degrees, and then May 2nd was 53, and the 3rd was 55. And so on May 1st last year, I had 2 growing degree days in the bank already. Then here on the 2nd, because it's now 53 degrees, 53 minus 50, I got 3 more growing degrees on that for a total for the year of 5. And then on the 3rd, I got 6 more degree days here, brought it up to 11. Got 1 more on the 4th, but didn't get any on the 5th. So I'm at 12 by the end of that. So that's just using these triangles here, these orange triangles you see that I've added up there. Now, if I take the blue line though, and I average together that data every 5 minutes, right? So I'm getting, what am I getting? 12 observations an hour over 24 hours. The average temperature on May 1st, you can see it was kind of sitting down here on the 2nd, it was skewed to the afternoon. So I didn't get a peak on May 2nd at noontime, like I'm doing here with the orange line. It was more like 3 in the afternoon. And so it was actually a temperature of 49 on average, because I had all this stuff sitting above my 50-degree threshold. And so, but by this measure, I hadn't had any degree days when May started last year. And it wasn't until May 2nd that I got our first degree days, when the average temperature was 52.79, which isn't the same as the 53 that my average. And you can kind of see that, right? This triangle here on May 2nd, orange triangle, is pretty big compared to the area under this blue curve here. And so by May 5th, I was sitting here just 9 growing degree days. And again, here, this method accounts for the skewness of my, temperature profile, and is going to be more accurate in terms of the available heat for things to actually start growing. So that's pretty good. It's a little more work to manage, but I just toss it all into a spreadsheet, keep track of it that way. I went to the Kansas City International Airport and downloaded data for there. And here's some growing degree days for you folks. Now you can go back quite a ways here. 1970, actually, for those of you that have been running around long enough, and I was living in Kansas in 1970. Kansas City International Airport didn't exist, but there was an airport downtown that I used as an approximation. And the total growing degree days in 1970 on this date was 29. In 2018, that's that kind of dotted purple line in the middle there, you had 23 growing degree days. I didn't put on 2019 because it looks just like 2020. You had 17 at this time. I mean, the curve looked just like 2020, but in 2020, you actually had 43. And so far this year, you've had 54 there at Kansas City International. So you can't really see it here, but the little green line down here in the bottom left-hand corner is sitting above the blue line just a little bit. So at least you're on track for a early spring maybe, where you should be seeing things. I'm betting you've seen dandelions already. You may be beyond dandelions, I'm not sure. And so I can compare Maine to Kansas City. Now you're in growing zone 6A. That's the blue line up top. This was last year. And I never got above, what, 2,400 growing degree days by the end of the season. That's what zone 5A does for me. And the types of things I can grow here are a lot different. Here's a picture out my window this morning. I'm trying to get my tomatoes started, and I've got snow all the way as far as you can see in my backyard. So we got a ways to go to catch up and before our bees are going to start having any forage plant. So here's just, now this is crazy, and I don't mean to go through all this or even you can make sense of it, but this is what I've been doing. On the left-hand side here, I've been looking at all these plants we've got on our property. This is just a subset of them. And then skip over the next 2 columns, and this is when I first started writing things down in 2018. It's when I noticed they were blooming, and I'd kind of wait. I wouldn't go with the very first dandelion, but when there were enough dandelions, the bees would get interested. And same with the blossoms on our apple trees. I wouldn't go with the very first blossom. I waited until the bees were actually starting to work it, and just tried to record the date. Now, sometimes I miss it, because I'm not paying attention, or I see it and I think, oh my gosh, I'm a week late at least. And I've been getting better and better as I go along. But these first, so in 2018 and 2019, I just used the data from either the NOAA download or Weather Underground or someplace like that. But last year I used those 5-minute intervals. So I'm starting to feel better about these over here. And now what I'm going to do in these next 2 columns, in the first 2 columns here, is just take an average of those sort of growing degree day units that match up to the first blossom. So I can say, for example, dandelions down here, right? The average first dandelion that I saw using that high-low method was 42 days using my 5-minute average, because I really only had last year to do it. Last year, we saw our first dandelions after just 7 growing degree days. The fall crops are real important when goldenrod out here is kind of essential if you're going to have a successful overwinter. And so that one I'll peg pretty well. We also have a black locust here that I think is important to you folks also. But I don't know if it's blooming there around the first week of June for you folks, but that seems to be what happens out here. And some things I keep track of that bees don't pay any attention. We got a couple of lady slippers in our woods. I like to see when those go. But some things like the blueberries and the blackberries, the honeybees are real important for that. And asters are also a good fall crop. But another way to look at this, and I think this probably shows a little clearer what I'm talking about, is to put it all on a chart here. And so I've kind of got a bunch of stuff that represents the life cycle of beekeeping here in our apiary. In next month, and actually even probably start up right away, I'm going to feed those hives I've got that survived, and those that didn't, I'm going to clean them out. And then look for dandelions. And now what I've done here is just kind of take the very first date I saw a dandelion and the very last date. So probably this left edge of the dandelion thing here, it was last year, and the right edge I think was probably for the purple line here, 2019. And so that's the range at which I can hope for dandelions to grow. And that's what I'm going to think about splitting my hives, particularly my apple blossoms are going here. As I said, the white clover is super important for me, and it starts to bloom around, the early June, and it'll continue to bloom right through. But these little shaded areas are marking the first blossom dates, and that's what's going to ensure whether or not I have a good honey harvest. The black locust are a June phenomenon here, but it's as early as the first week and as late as the third week. Milkweed, we like to do the bees love the milkweed, and so that's usually a late June, early July crop. We have this shrub called St. John's wort, which I wasn't very familiar with, but my wife planted it and the bees go nuts for it. And it turns out it comes at a really good time, because early July, we're losing some of these spring forage plants, and this one kicks in then, and it's before the goldenrod really kicks in. So I get a good extraction here. I try to extract on the clover honey, and then maybe a second time on the goldenrod, because I find the taste is so different between the two. And some people like the goldenrod honey, other people I like the clover personally, but some people like this. It's hot, it's spicier. I don't know if you have goldenrod out there, but it's a spicier one. And then you get the fall asters that are real important. And that's when I'm doing my heavy duty mite check and treatments. I should probably move that over to July, but my mite kind of bombs occur in August into September, but and I'll do another treatment, maybe even into November. If I have to, because I've taken off some honey, I'll feed the bees in October, just getting them ready, and I put the quote boxes on and I'm ready to start again. And so a lot of that, again, looks at what are the plants that are blooming and what's going on in my hive, and looking for the honey flows. And usually it's the clover that's gonna be my first real obvious honey flow. And I'll be looking for that to build up all through June. And then I'm trying to manage my swarms in that area, splitting the strong hives and maybe doing some artificial swarms, things like that. So that's how it works. That's what I do. And that's what my apiary looks like, sort of beekeeping in Maine. Be curious to hear a little bit about you folks and how it differs in your neck of the woods. And I've got a bunch of resources that I can let you have, but maybe I'll send a copy of this slide deck to Eric, so he can distribute it, or you can get access to it if you like.
That was awesome. Thank you, Michael. So everybody got muted because there was a lot of background noise at the very beginning. And so I can unmute everybody now, but I'm still worried about background noise. So if anybody wants to post a question, if you scroll down to the chat, to the sort of bottom menu bar, there should be a chat option. You can click on that button and type your question into the box for Michael. I see one comment from Brian already. Michael, I really appreciate that you spent the time and energy to look up our local temperatures. So thank you for that. That was great.
Yeah, it was fun. It was kind of interesting. Brian, how do you do your 25 hives? I mean, do you sell a lot of honey with that? And you know, it feels like a lot to manage, at least with all the other stuff I got going on.
So we've got some other questions that have popped up before Brian either turns his microphone. Oh wait, he can't, or he can respond in the chat, I guess.
Fine, that's all right.
Here's a question from Phil. What do you use for your mite treatments in September?
Oh, okay. I use I tried a lot of stuff. The oxalic dribble I think is going to work best for me, but we have such a long season since we're still building brood into August. You know, I was talking with Eric and he said basically the dirt sets in and you're done by August. We're still building up brood into August, sometimes even into September. So a lot of the treatments that I'd like to use, well, we got to use a multiple set of treatments. And so I've tried the thymol, I've tried the oxalic acid, a couple other products. I really wanted not to get too aggressive with the pesticides because it's pretty hard on the bees. The hop guard didn't work for me at all, though. That was just kind of a mess and a waste of time from my perspective. I don't think I want to do the oxalic vapor one because it's a huge investment and expense. And my local beekeeping club hasn't yet invested in the vaporizers. So my plan is to stay with like the Apiary or maybe some thymol. I need to find a good third treatment to mix with the dribble. I'll do the dribble at the very end of the year when the brood is pretty much done. But yeah, that's the treatment I've been using with mixed success. Actually, I think two things are plaguing us up here. One is the queen quality hasn't been very good, and there's been some really interesting research by some folks here in Maine that are doing locally raised queens, and they seem to believe that that's the key to success, that you really need to winter over your queens and raise them yourself here. But there's so many other beekeepers around that I'm getting drift, and I get a lot of bees coming from other hives. And I think that's bringing the mites in too. So I could raise my own queens, but if I don't have more than 5 hives, I'm not going to count on the genetic quality to preserve from cycle to cycle. They're going to get bred by mutts, as they say.
That makes sense. Thanks for sharing. There's a question from Mike McGee here asking if you could put that resource list back up.
Yeah.
And if you do want to send us the slide deck, we'd be happy to include a link to that in our YouTube presentation once we present the recorded version. But I figured we could just put that up while we're chatting. Yeah. Here's a question from Robert Burns. Where did you live in Kansas?
So I lived just south of Lawrence in a little tiny town called Baldwin. So if you're familiar with Olathe, Kansas, you just keep on going sort of southwest another 15, 20 miles, as I recall. Yeah, formative years of my life, hands down.
Awesome. There was another question here. So to be sure I understood the gist of this, the reason to track is to know when to do what for the hive, split, feed, harvest, treat. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's pretty much the way I've been trying to use it. It's not perfect. It's sort of basically your intuition and common sense, but there are other things, some folks, I think, Eric, you said used a scale to weigh your hives to see when the honey flow is on. And that's absolutely probably bulletproof way to figure it out. I just haven't gone that heavily into the technology yet. And other people put temperature sensors inside their hives or little cameras and stethoscopes or whatever. I haven't gotten that kind of, this is as techie as I've gotten. And it also helps me in the garden and think about what I want to plant when I see like I said, I need clover during the year. I need to have that St. John's wort, which is going to be a good forage when I'm anticipating a dearth or a hot, dry July.
Yeah, actually, I stole that scale idea from, I think Mike Palmer actually loads his colonies onto a scale every year, which seems like a backbreaking enterprise to me, but
but I think you're right. I think I remember seeing it.
I split the difference and grabbed a cheap little, is like for weighing fish. And it's like an analog scale. It's got a little stopper on it, and I just weigh the back of the hives. And it'd be interesting to correlate that to growing degree days and kind of blind yourself to the actual like specific plant phenology and just see how the flows correlated by weight to growing degree days.
Yeah, completely.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, I think it's most useful at the beginning of the season for us, just because our winters are so long, and it's kind of a sprint to see if we can keep the bees alive to get to the first dandelion blooms and get them to build up again. I don't know if you folks had dandelions yet. You must have, right?
I feel like I have seen some, but I live in a mostly urban area, not super urban, but suburban, and I have not spotted them yet generally. Has anybody else seen dandelions start popping up?
Just barely.
Yeah.
Nothing significant yet.
Wow. Okay. Well, but that's about right, because I see them anywhere from 7 to 50 growing degree days, and you're just around 50 or so. And you folks, maybe if you're more rural than Kansas City International, then it might be a little cooler in there. Yeah.
We've got a lot of written comments saying that either they haven't started, but or they're just getting ready. Folks are seeing them getting ready to bloom. So,
Pam, it sounds like you and I might have been in Baldwin at the same time, which is kind of amazing.
Maybe you graduated together.
That's crazy.
Well, Michael, thanks so much. This has been a great presentation. I think a good kind of intro to growing degree days for folks. If anybody has any questions, kind of speak now or forever hold your peace. But otherwise, I just really appreciate you doing this for us, Michael, and it's been informative, and this has been great. And yeah, thanks for sharing your time.
It's great. Okay, I'll send you the slide deck. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. Good luck and have a good bee year.
Thank you, Michael. I assume you work for electric utility?
You know, I've consulted for an electric utility. I actually teach economics at a school here in town, but yeah.
You talk about forecasting load or something.
Yeah, no, I've done a lot of that and kind of cut my teeth on electricity demand forecasting with Central Maine Power Company. But right now they're the evil doers in our neck of the woods. So.
You must have had some opinions when the power was going out in Texas. Did you have some things that you wish people would listen to you about?
I kind of watched that disaster unfold over the years because they just weren't paying attention to and it's not Texas, it's a lot of places. They're not paying attention to the infrastructure and the grid. It's, you know, you want to talk about something as a country we want to be concerned about, it's our infrastructure. And that's not a political statement at all. I mean, I think everybody on both sides of the aisle can agree with that. And if we don't shore up things like our electrical grid, we're really at risk, and roads and bridges and all the rest of it. But yeah, you could kind of see that was going to be a problem, and they haven't fixed it. They just kind of kicking the can down the road, and that's tough.
A very interesting presentation. I appreciate it very much, and have a good bee season up there.
Really enjoyed doing it.
Thank you, Michael. It's been great.
Take care.
Thank you, Michael.
You too.
And the rest of you, thank you very much for attending today, and put the good word out to some of your friends there if they weren't here today, and let them know that this is going to be available for them to watch later. And hopefully we got our fingers crossed, we maybe can have a meeting at Bass Pro next month, or have a live meeting somewhere. We're still trying to work out details. So we're hopefully get to see people and actually exchange the same air, so to speak, with masks on.
Is Bass Pro making it difficult, or
What'd you say?
is Bass Pro making it difficult for us, or what's the holdup?
It's based on these Kansas City limits on how many people can be in a room.
Ah, okay.
Well, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. You all have a great weekend. Maybe go out and have a chance to check your bees